Hello, everybody. So I'm very early to a gig that I have today, and I'm just sitting in the parking lot. So I figured I would make a video talking about a thought that I have, an opinion that I hold on condenser mics. Now, a lot of people, for their first studio mic that they get, buy a condenser mic, and it's for good reason. I mean, they sound nice and crispy. You can record quieter sound sources, especially with cheaper preamps. I love condenser mics. I have several of them. They create a very nice character, especially on instruments and things like that. However, I think that oftentimes dynamic mics get a bad rap, especially when it comes to studio use. And I think that's a little unfair. And as I have recorded for a long time, I've actually moved in some cases to using dynamic mics over condenser mics for two reasons, really. The first one is if I'm recording in a room that isn't necessarily treated, having the dynamic mic, which generally will have better rejection, the pickup pattern is a bit tighter, there's a bit more fall off, tends to work better for home studio situations. And so, especially with vocals, you're able to get a more isolated sound in an imperfect room. Now, if you do have a treated room, and a dynamic or a condenser mic will give you the same isolation, there's another big reason why sometimes I'll actually tend to use dynamic mics still anyway, especially for certain vocals, and that is the saturation aspect. Now, dynamic mics saturate really, really well in some cases. I have Blue Encores that, although they're pretty feedback prone for live use, I love using them in studio settings for vocals because when you really scream into them, they saturate really nicely in the high end. It almost gives you this analog tape-like, in some cases tubey feel for like $100 for really, really, rockin' rock vocals. I guess you would want rock vocals to be rockin', or very big like belty leads. I like how they overload and saturate a little bit. Condenser mics, and this is more of the hunch thing. I'm kind of just making this part up. It's one of those things that sounds like it should be true, so I'm going to say it as if it's true. Condenser mics were first made in order to raise the signal to noise ratio. There we go. In things like old telephones. That's kind of why they were invented, so you could get a stronger signal going through. So when people were using condenser mics, they were almost always, in recording settings, once they became common for studio use, they were basically always using them through analog preamps. And these analog preamps took away some of the brittle, high-end, sort of shimmery metallic quality that the condenser mics had and created this rich organic saturation. Then when you recorded them to tape, there was even more of this nice organic saturation, warmth, if you want to call it. And so when we're using condenser mics now, we're basically plugging them right into a pretty transparent preamp in our audio interface and recording them into a DAW, and in many cases not using, analog modeled plugins and things like that. I know the new Slate Digital stuff can recreate a lot of that analog sound with their virtual recording studio. People started showing up, so now I'm back home. Gig went great, thanks for asking. So to wrap up what I was saying, I really feel like when people are buying condenser mics, they're not thinking about the fact that they were put through all this analog gear, and with a few exceptions, I mean, obviously some of the really nice condenser mics still sound good, like the signal coming out of the mic is amazing. Like, I'm not saying the U87 isn't worth it if you're not going to be using outboard gear, but if you're getting a cheap condenser mic, it doesn't really stop there. I mean, if you're just running it into your transparent, PreSonus audio box preamps or your 2i2 preamps, it's gonna sound papery, it's gonna sound thin because you're not getting any of that hardware saturation. Now, you can, as I mentioned in the other clip, with things like the Slate plugins, you can add in some sort of modeled warmth. You can even just throw an overdrive on some of the vocals and they'll get some of that nice, focused, buzzy high end that you get from the analog gear. But you can really get that organic sound with dynamic mics if you have enough headroom with your gain. So I feel like sort of the main point of this video is, if that's what you're after, if you're after an organic, saturated sounding vocal, you don't have to use a condenser mic. You can use a dynamic mic. And I'm not talking an SM7B, I'm talking like the Blue Encores that I used earlier. The whole thing about those old school sounding vocals is that they sounded like crap, but they sounded like crap in a good way. That's what outboard gear does. It distorts the sound, it saturates the sound, it makes it not clean, but it makes it not clean in a way that we've come to know and love. And dynamic mics are a great way where you can do that. So hopefully when I jumped back in, I kept the same thought process. I don't know if I did. Let me know what you're recording with. Are you using dynamic mics, condenser mics? I use a combination of both. But let me know your thoughts. How do you achieve that awesome old school saturated vocal sound? Thank you for stopping by. I know this one was kind of rambly. Thanks for being here. I will see you next time.